Jake Morrison sat at his kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills that seemed to grow bigger every day. His small apartment near the university felt way too expensive for just one person, but finding a good roommate was turning out to be harder than he thought. For 3 weeks, Jake had been interviewing people who wanted to share his place. First came the guy who collected vintage soda bottles and wanted to turn the living room into his personal museum. Then there was the girl who insisted on bringing her 5 cats even though the lease clearly said no pets. The worst was probably the person who showed up wearing a cape and speaking only in movie quotes. Jake was starting to think he might have to move back in with his parents when his phone buzzed with a new message. Someone named Zara had responded to his online roommate ad. Her message was polite but a little formal, like she was writing a business letter instead of a casual text. "Hello, Jake. I am very interested in your room for rent. I am an exchange student from a very remote location. I am clean, quiet, and eager to learn about local customs. Could we perhaps arrange a video call to discuss the details?" At least she could write in complete sentences, Jake thought. That was already better than most of the responses he'd gotten. He quickly replied and set up a video call for that evening. When Jake opened his laptop at 7 o'clock sharp, he was surprised to see that Zara was already waiting in the video chat room. The first thing he noticed was how pretty she was, with pale skin and unusually bright green eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked almost too perfect, like she was going to a job interview instead of a casual roommate chat. "Hello, Jake," she said, and her voice had a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." "No problem," Jake replied, settling into his chair. "So, tell me about yourself. What are you studying?" Zara paused for just a moment too long before answering. "I am studying human behavior and cultural practices. It is a very specialized field in my country." "Cool. Where are you from exactly?" Jake asked, genuinely curious about the accent. "It is a very remote place. You probably have not heard of it," Zara said quickly. "The important thing is that I am very serious about my studies and need a quiet place to live." Jake nodded, though something about her answer felt a bit odd. Before he could ask more questions, Zara started asking her own. "Tell me, Jake, what are the sleeping customs in this area? Do humans typically sleep alone or do they prefer companionship during rest periods?" Jake blinked. That was definitely not a normal roommate question. Well, most people sleep alone unless they're, in a relationship or something. Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curious about local customs," Zara said, but she looked almost worried. "And what about temperature preferences? Do humans prefer warm or cool sleeping environments?" "I guess it depends on the person," Jake said slowly. "Are you someone who gets really hot or cold at night?" "Something like that," Zara replied, and Jake noticed she seemed to be avoiding looking directly at the camera. The conversation continued for about 20 minutes, and Jake found himself more confused with each passing minute. Zara asked strange questions about everything from food storage to whether Jake had many visitors. She wanted to know about his class schedule, his study habits, and whether he spent much time at home. The weirdest part came when Jake was explaining the apartment layout. Behind Zara on the video call, he could see what looked like a wall, but it seemed to shimmer slightly, almost like it was made of metal instead of regular drywall. "Hey, what's up with your background there?" Jake asked, squinting at his screen. "It looks kind of metallic or something." Zara's eyes went wide for a second and she quickly turned to look behind her. "Oh, yes, it is advanced soundproofing technology from my country. We take our studies very seriously and require complete silence." "Wow, that's pretty high-tech," Jake said. "Must be expensive?" "Yes, very," Zara said, turning back to the camera. "My government provides the best equipment for international students." Despite all the weird questions and strange answers, Jake found himself liking Zara. She seemed genuinely interested in being a good roommate, and when she smiled, it made her whole face light up in a way that was hard to resist. "Look, to be honest," Jake said. "I've had some pretty terrible experiences with potential roommates lately. I need someone who's going to pay rent on time, keep things clean, and not turn my apartment into a circus. I can assure you, I am very responsible, Zara said earnestly. In fact, I can pay 3 months of rent in advance if that would help convince you of my sincerity. Jake's jaw nearly dropped. 3 months in advance? That would solve his money problems immediately and give him breathing room to focus on his studies instead of worrying about bills. That's actually amazing, he said. Are you sure you can afford that? Money is not a concern for me, Zara replied. I am more interested in finding someone who can help me understand Earth customs. I mean American customs. I am very eager to learn about how people live here. There was something about the way she said Earth customs that made Jake's brain itch, but the promise of 3 months' rent paid up front was too good to pass up. His practical side won out over his curiosity. All right, if you're serious about the advance payment, then I think we can make this work, Jake said. When would you want to move in? As soon as possible, Zara replied immediately. Tonight, if that is acceptable. Tonight? Jake repeated. Don't you need time to pack and stuff? I travel very light, Zara said. I have everything I need in one suitcase. After they ended the call, Jake sat back in his chair, feeling like he'd just agreed to something much bigger than a simple roommate arrangement. Zara seemed nice enough, but there was definitely something unusual about her. The way she talked, the questions she asked, even the way she held herself during the video call. It all felt slightly off, like she was playing a character instead of just being herself. But 3 months' rent in advance was 3 months' rent in advance. Jake decided he could deal with a quirky roommate if it meant he could actually afford to eat something other than instant noodles for the next few months. Around 10 that evening, there was a soft knock at Jake's door. When he opened it, Zara stood in the hallway with just one silver suitcase exactly as she'd promised. In person, she looked even more striking than she had on video, but also somehow more fragile, like she was nervous about something. Hello, Jake, she said, that same formal tone in her voice. Thank you for accepting me as your roommate. I promise I will do my best to be a good housemate and learn your ways. As Jake helped her carry the surprisingly light suitcase inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to become much more interesting than he'd bargained for. Little did he know, he was absolutely right. The first few days with Zara as his roommate were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. On the surface, she seemed like the perfect housemate. She was incredibly clean, almost obsessively so. She never left dishes in the sink, never hogged the bathroom, and always asked permission before using anything that belonged to Jake. But there were little things that made Jake wonder what he'd gotten himself into. For starters, Zara never seemed to eat regular food. Jake's refrigerator was usually stocked with leftover pizza, some questionable lunch meat, and whatever vegetables he'd bought with good intentions but never actually cooked. Zara's contribution to the fridge was a collection of small glass bottles, filled with a bright blue liquid that looked like it belonged in a science lab rather than a kitchen. What's that stuff? Jake asked on the third morning, pointing to one of the bottles Zara was drinking from. Protein shake, she replied quickly, not meeting his eyes. Very popular in my homeland. Lots of nutrients. Jake had tried plenty of protein shakes in his life, especially during his brief attempt at getting into shape last year. None of them had ever been that particular shade of electric blue, and none of them had ever made the person drinking them glow slightly around the edges. Though maybe that last part was just his imagination. Then there was the way Zara talked to his plants. Jake had never been much of a green thumb, but his mom had given him a small potted plant when he moved into the apartment, and somehow he'd managed to keep it alive for almost a year. It wasn't thriving exactly, but it wasn't dead either, which Jake considered a victory. On his 4th day living with Zara, Jake came home from class to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor next to the plant, having what appeared to be a full conversation with it. You need more water, don't you? She was saying softly. And perhaps some of this mineral supplement. Jake means well, but he doesn't understand your needs. Jake cleared his throat, and Zara jumped like she'd been caught, doing something wrong. Oh, hello, Jake, she said, scrambling to her feet. I was just talking to your plant. In my culture, we believe plants respond well to verbal encouragement. Right, Jake said slowly. That's nice of you. What really freaked him out was that over the next few days, the plant actually started looking better. A lot better. It grew taller, its leaves became greener and fuller, and it even started producing small flowers that Jake was pretty sure it had never had before. But the strangest thing about living with Zara was how tired she always looked. Despite going to bed at a reasonable hour every night, she always appeared exhausted in the morning. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin that seemed even paler than usual, and a general air of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Jake started to worry that maybe she was sick or stressed about school. He'd been an international student himself during a semester abroad, and he remembered how difficult it could be to adjust to a new place and new customs. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked one morning when Zara looked particularly worn out. "You seem really tired lately." Zara's expression became guarded. "I am fine. Just adjusting to the different sleeping conditions here. The air is different. The sounds are different. Everything is different." Jake nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, I get that. It took me forever to get used to sleeping in a new place when I studied abroad. Maybe you need some white noise or something? I have a fan you could borrow." "That is very kind," Zara said, but she didn't sound convinced that a fan would solve her problem. As the days passed, Zara's exhaustion seemed to get worse instead of better. She would fall asleep at the kitchen table while drinking her weird blue protein shakes. Jake would find her dozing on the couch in the middle of the day, only to wake up when he came home from class looking more tired than when she'd fallen asleep. The breaking point came on their 5th night living together. Jake had been having trouble sleeping himself, partly because he was worried about Zara and partly because he could hear her moving around in her room at all hours of the night. It sounded like she was pacing back and forth, and occasionally he could hear what sounded like her, talking to herself in a language he didn't recognize. At exactly 3 in the morning, Jake was jolted awake by a soft knocking on his bedroom door. He sat up in bed, confused and a little worried. The knocking came again, gentle but persistent. "Jake?" Zara's voice came through the door and she sounded upset. "I am sorry to bother you, but could I speak with you for a moment? It is important." Jake grabbed a t-shirt and opened the door. Zara stood in the hallway looking absolutely miserable. Her hair was messy, her eyes were red with exhaustion, and she was wearing what looked like a nightgown that seemed to shimmer and change colors in the dim light from the hallway. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" Zara took a shaky breath. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you will not think I am crazy or ask me to leave." "Okay," Jake said carefully. "What's going on?" "I cannot sleep," Zara said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have not really slept since I arrived here, and I am becoming very unwell." "Why can't you sleep? Is it the bed? The room? I can help you figure out what's wrong." Zara looked down at her hands, which Jake noticed were trembling slightly. "In my homeland, people do not sleep alone. It is not just a preference, Jake. It is a physical necessity. My people cannot achieve proper rest without the presence of another person nearby." Jake blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Like, you need someone in the room with you?" "More than that," Zara said, and her cheeks turned pink. "We need physical contact, shared warmth. It is how our bodies regulate temperature and achieve the deep rest we require. Without it, we become weak and eventually—" She trailed off, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. "Eventually what?" he asked gently. "Eventually we become too weak to function," she finished quietly. "I know this must sound very strange to you. I know it is not normal for humans to have such requirements, but I am desperate, Jake. I have tried everything I can think of, but I cannot sleep alone." Jake stared at her, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to suggest she see a doctor or call someone from her country who could help her. But another part of him, the part that had been noticing all the strange little things about Zara, wondered if maybe she was telling him something much bigger than a simple cultural difference. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Jake asked carefully. Zara's face went from pink to bright red. "I know it is a huge imposition, and I know we barely know each other, but I was wondering if you might be willing to help me, even if it means sharing sleeping space. I promise I would not be any trouble. I would stay on my side. and I would be gone before you wake up. You would hardly know I was there." Jake looked at Zara's exhausted face, at the way she was swaying, slightly on her feet, at the genuine desperation in her eyes. Whatever was going on with her, whether it was a cultural thing or something else entirely, she was clearly suffering. "Let me think about it," Jake said finally. "But first, are you sure there isn't anything else you want to tell me? Because I have to be honest, Zara, some things about you don't quite add up." Zara's eyes went wide, and for a moment Jake thought she was going to confess to something. But then she just nodded slowly. "I understand your confusion," she said, "and I promise I will explain everything when I am able to think more clearly. But right now I am so tired I can barely stand. Please, Jake, I need your help." Looking at her exhausted face, Jake made a decision that he knew would change everything. Between them, he just had no idea how much. Jake spent the rest of that night staring at his ceiling, trying to figure out what he'd gotten himself into. On one hand, Zara seemed genuinely desperate and exhausted. On the other hand, agreeing to share a bed with someone he barely knew felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure he was ready to cross. But when he saw Zara the next morning looking even more pale and shaky than the night before, his decision was made for him. She could barely keep her eyes open long enough to pour her strange blue drink, and Jake was genuinely worried she might collapse. "Okay," he said, sitting down across from her at the kitchen table. "Let's figure this out." Zara looked up at him, with hope in her tired eyes. "You mean?" "I mean we're going to try to help you sleep," Jake said firmly. "But we need to set some ground rules, okay?" For the first time in days, Zara smiled. It was a small smile, but it made her whole face look brighter. "Yes, of course. Whatever rules you need." Jake pulled out a notebook and started writing. "First, we each stay on our own side of the bed. I'll put a pillow between us if that helps. Second, we both wear appropriate sleepwear. Third, this is just about helping you sleep, nothing else. And fourth, if either of us feels uncomfortable, at any point we stop immediately." "Those terms are very reasonable," Zara agreed quickly. "I am so grateful, Jake. You have no idea how much this means to me." That first night, Jake felt incredibly awkward. His bed had never felt smaller than when he was trying to lie perfectly still on one side while Zara settled in on the other. She was wearing what looked like a long-sleeved pajama set that seemed to shimmer slightly in the dark, and Jake kept his eyes firmly fixed on the ceiling. "Thank you," Zara whispered into the darkness. "I know this is strange for you." "It's fine," Jake whispered back, though his heart was beating so fast he was sure she could hear it. "Just try to get some sleep." To Jake's amazement, the arrangement actually worked. Within minutes, he could hear Zara's breathing slow down and even out. For the first time since she'd moved in, she seemed to be getting real rest. Jake, however, barely slept at all. He was too aware of the other person in his bed, too conscious of every little movement and sound. But when he woke up the next morning and saw how much better Zara looked, he knew they were on the right track. "You look like a completely different person," Jake said over breakfast. And it was true. The dark circles under Zara's eyes were gone. Her skin had some color back, and she seemed more alert and energetic than he'd ever seen her. "I feel wonderful," Zara said, practically glowing with happiness. "I cannot thank you enough, Jake. You may have saved my life." Jake laughed, thinking she was being dramatic, but something in her expression made him think she might actually be serious. As the days went on, their nighttime routine became more natural. Jake would go to bed first, and Zara would quietly join him after he was settled. She would whisper goodnight, and they would both try to fall asleep on their respective sides of the bed. The problem was that Zara turned out to be the cuddliest sleeper Jake had ever encountered. The first time Jake woke up with Zara wrapped around him like a human octopus, he thought it was just an accident. Her arm was thrown over his chest, her leg was tangled with his, and her face was pressed against his shoulder. What was really weird was how cold her skin felt, almost like she had a fever in reverse. Jake carefully untangled himself and moved back to his side of the bed, thinking that would be the end of it. But the next morning, he woke up in the exact same position with Zara clinging to him like he was a life preserver. Zara," Jake said gently, trying to wake her up without startling her. She opened her eyes slowly, and for a moment she looked confused about where she was. Then her eyes went wide with embarrassment. "Oh no," she said, quickly moving away from him. I'm so sorry, Jake. I had no idea I was doing that." "It's okay," Jake said, though he wasn't entirely sure it was. "Maybe we need to put up some kind of barrier or something." They tried using extra pillows to create a wall between them, but somehow Zara managed to climb over or around every obstacle Jake could think of. No matter what they did, Jake would wake up every morning to find Zara cuddled up against him. The strangest part was how cold she always felt. Not just cool, but actually cold, like she'd been standing outside in winter weather. Sometimes Jake would wake up and find frost patterns on his pillowcase where Zara's breath had been. "Are you feeling okay?" Jake asked one morning after finding tiny ice crystals on his sheets. "You feel really cold at night." Zara looked panicked for a moment before forcing a smile. "I have always had circulation problems, very common in my homeland. The cold climate, you know." Jake didn't know actually, because Zara had never told him exactly where her homeland was, but he was starting to suspect that wherever she came from, it was a lot different from anywhere he'd ever been. The situation got more complicated when Jake's friends started asking questions. His best friend Danny had been trying to come over for weeks to watch football games, but Jake kept making excuses. "What's going on with you lately?" Danny asked during one of their phone calls. "You're being really weird about having people over. Is everything okay with the new roommate?" "Everything's fine," Jake said quickly. "Zara's great. She's from a different culture and she's still adjusting." "Different how? Like, is she really religious or something?" Jake struggled to find an explanation that wouldn't sound completely insane. "She has some specific needs when it comes to sleeping arrangements. It's a cultural thing." "Sleeping arrangements?" Danny sounded confused. "What does that have to do with me coming over to watch the game?" Jake realized he couldn't explain without revealing way more than he was comfortable sharing. "Look, can we just watch at your place for a while? I'll bring snacks." The conversation left Jake feeling more confused than ever about his living situation. How was he supposed to explain to his friends and family that his roommate couldn't sleep alone and had somehow become his nighttime cuddling partner? The worst part was that Jake was starting to realize he didn't actually mind the arrangement as much as he thought he would. Despite the weird temperature thing and the mysterious background, Zara was actually a pleasure to live with during the day. She was kind, funny when she relaxed enough to let her guard down, and surprisingly easy to talk to. She was also genuinely interested in everything Jake had to say about his life, his studies, and his dreams for the future. Sometimes he would catch her watching him with an expression that was hard to read, like she was trying to memorize everything about him. Jake also couldn't ignore the fact that he was sleeping better than he had in years. Despite the unusual circumstances, having Zara there somehow made him feel more relaxed and rested. He started looking forward to their quiet conversations before falling asleep, and the comfortable weight of her presence next to him. But late, at night, when Zara was curled up against him and he could feel her cold skin and hear her occasionally talking in that strange language she sometimes used in her sleep, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to his roommate than she was telling him. He just had no idea how much more, or how drastically his life was about to change when the truth finally came out. 3 weeks into their unusual sleeping arrangement, Jake's life had settled into a routine that felt both completely normal and absolutely crazy at the same time. During the day, he and Zara lived like regular roommates. They shared meals, watched movies together, and talked about everything from Jake's astronomy classes to Zara's mysterious studies in human behavior. But at night, they shared something much more intimate and confusing. The truth came out during what was supposed to be the most stressful week of Jake's academic life. His thesis defense was scheduled for Friday, and he'd been working around the clock to prepare his presentation on the possibility of extraterrestrial life successfully integrating into human society. The irony of his topic wasn't lost on him, especially when he would catch Zara listening to him practice with an expression that looked almost guilty. "You really believe there's life on other planets?" Zara asked one evening as Jake rehearsed his presentation for the 100th time. "Absolutely," Jake said, looking up from his notes. I mean, the universe is huge. It would be pretty arrogant to think we're the only intelligent species out there. The real question isn't whether alien life exists, but whether we'd recognize it if we met it and whether we could coexist peacefully. Zara was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. And you think humans would be accepting of different types of beings? I'd like to think so, Jake said. I mean, it would probably be scary at first, and there would definitely be people who'd react badly. But I think most humans are good at adapting to new situations, especially if the other species was peaceful and just trying to fit in. That night, Zara seemed more restless than usual. Jake could feel her tossing and turning, and several times he woke up to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window like she was watching for something. "Everything okay?" Jake whispered during one of these episodes. "Just thinking," Zara replied softly. "Go back to sleep, Jake. You need rest for your big presentation." Thursday night, the night before Jake's thesis defense, everything changed. Jake had been so nervous about his presentation that he'd barely eaten dinner. He kept running through his notes, checking his slides, and muttering key points under his breath. Zara had been unusually quiet all evening, watching him with that same guilty expression he'd been noticing more and more lately. When they went to bed, Jake was still too keyed up to sleep. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and going over his presentation in his head. Next to him, Zara was also awake, though she was trying to pretend she wasn't. "Jake?" she said finally, her voice barely audible in the darkness. "Yes?" "What you said earlier, about humans being able to accept different types of beings. Did you really mean that?" Jake turned to look at her, though he could barely make out her silhouette in the dark room. "Of course I meant it. Why?" Zara was quiet for so long that Jake thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she sat up suddenly, and Jake could see that she was trembling. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking. "And I am terrified that you will hate me for lying to you." Jake sat up too, suddenly wide awake. "Zara, what's going on?" "You were right to think that things about me didn't add up," she said, and Jake could hear tears in her voice. "I have been lying to you since the day we met, and I cannot continue to deceive someone who has been so kind to me." Jake's heart started beating faster. "Okay, whatever it is, just tell me." Zara took a shaky breath. "I am not from another country, Jake. I am from another planet." For a moment, Jake was sure he'd misheard her. "What?" "I am what you would call an alien," Zara continued, the words tumbling out of her like she couldn't stop them now that she'd started. "I'm part of an advanced research team that was sent to study human behavior and culture. We were supposed to observe from a distance, but my transport broke down and I became stranded here." Jake stared at her in the darkness, his mind completely blank. "You're joking." "I am not joking," Zara said, and she sounded absolutely miserable. "Everything I told you about needing physical contact to sleep was true, but not because of cultural customs. My species requires shared warmth and touch to properly regulate our body temperature and brain function during rest periods. Without it, we become weak and eventually die." Jake got out of bed and turned on the lamp, needing to see Zara's face. She was sitting with her knees drawn up to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks, looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen. "You're serious," Jake said, and it wasn't a question. Suddenly, all the strange things about Zara made perfect sense. The blue drinks, the conversations with plants, the cold skin, the frost patterns, the way she talked about Earth customs like she was studying them from the outside. "I am completely serious," Zara said. "And I understand if you want me to leave immediately. I understand if you never want to see me again. I have been lying to you about the most fundamental thing about myself." Jake sat back down on the bed, his mind racing. "How long have you been on Earth?" "About 6 months. I was supposed to be here for just a few weeks, but something went wrong with our technology and I became stuck. My team thinks I am dead." "And you've been alone this whole time?" Zara nodded miserably. "I tried to survive on my own, but I was getting weaker and weaker." When I saw your roommate advertisement, I thought maybe I could find a way to get the contact I needed without revealing the truth. I never expected what? I never expected to care about you so much, Zara said quietly. People are capable of forming emotional bonds with other intelligent species, but I had never experienced anything like what I feel for you. It was supposed to be just a survival arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became something much more important to me. Jake looked at Zara, really looked at her, and realized that despite the shocking revelation, she was still the same person who had been making him laugh during dinner, who had been taking care of his plant, who had been curling up against him every night for the past 3 weeks. So all those times you were asking about human customs, Jake began. I was genuinely trying to learn, Zara said. Everything about your species fascinates me. The way you form relationships, the way you care for each other, the way you dream about the future. I have learned more about humanity from living with you than from months of distant observation. Jake was quiet for a long time, processing everything Zara had told him. Part of him wanted to be angry about the deception, but a bigger part of him was just amazed. He was living with an actual alien, a being from another world who had chosen to trust him with the truth. Are there others like you on Earth? Jake asked finally. A few, but we are not supposed to make contact with each other while we are undercover. It is too dangerous. Dangerous how? If your governments discovered us before we had completed our research, it could lead to panic or worse. We have seen what humans do when they fear something they do not understand. Jake nodded slowly. That made sense, unfortunately. So what happens now? He asked. Do you try to get back to your planet? Do you stay here? What do you want to do? Zara looked at him with surprise. You are not afraid of me? Should I be afraid of you? Many humans would be. Jake considered this. Are you going to hurt me or anyone else? Never, Zara said immediately. My people are completely peaceful. We would never harm another intelligent being. Then no, I'm not afraid of you, Jake said. Confused, maybe. Overwhelmed, definitely. But not afraid. Zara's face crumpled with relief and she started crying again. Without thinking, Jake moved closer and put his arms around her. She felt the same as she always did, cold and somehow fragile. But now he understood why. I thought you would hate me, she whispered against his shoulder. I could never hate you, Jake said. And as the words came out of his mouth, he realized he meant them completely. You're still you, Zara. You're still the person who's been making my life better for the past month. As they held each other in the quiet of Jake's bedroom, both of them knew that everything had changed between them. But neither of them was sure if it had changed for better or worse. Jake barely slept for the rest of that night. He lay awake holding Zara, his mind spinning with everything she'd told him. By the time morning came, he felt like he was living in a completely different world than the one he'd woken up in the day before. But he still had his thesis defense to get through. You should go, Zara said quietly as Jake's alarm went off. Today is important for your future. Jake looked down at her, still curled up against his chest. In the morning light, she looked exactly the same as she always had. But now he found himself noticing little details he'd missed before. The way her skin seemed to have a slight shimmer to it, how her eyes were just a little too bright to be completely human, the way she never seemed to blink as often as other people. Are you going to be here when I get back? Jake asked. Do you want me to be? Jake answered without hesitation. Yes. Zara smiled, and it was the first genuine, unreserved smile he'd ever seen from her. Then I will be here. Jake's thesis defense should have been the most stressful day of his academic career, but instead he felt strangely calm. As he stood in front of his committee, presenting his research on the possibilities of peaceful extraterrestrial integration into human society, he found himself speaking with a confidence and passion he'd never felt before. The key to successful integration, Jake heard himself saying, would be understanding that intelligence and consciousness can take many different forms. What matters isn't whether a being looks like us or comes from the same planet as us. What matters is whether they share our values of peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. One of his committee members raised an eyebrow. That's a very optimistic view of human nature, Mr. Morrison. History suggests that humans don't always react well to differences. You're right, Jake admitted. There would definitely be fear and resistance from some people, but I believe that on an individual level, humans are capable of amazing acceptance and compassion when they take the time to really get to know someone. The problem usually isn't with individual relationships, it's with large-scale fear and misunderstanding. After his presentation, Jake's advisor pulled him aside. That was impressive work, Jake. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but your insights about interspecies relationships felt remarkably authentic. Jake managed to smile. I guess I've just been thinking about it a lot lately. When Jake got home that afternoon, he found Zara sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked up when he walked in, her expression nervous and hopeful. How did it go? She asked. I passed, Jake said, sitting down across from her. Actually, I think I did better than I've ever done on anything academic in my life. I am so proud of you, Zara said, and the genuine joy in her voice made Jake's chest feel warm. Now we need to talk about us, Jake said gently, about what happens next. Zara nodded, her expression becoming serious. I have been thinking about that all day. I need to be honest with you about something else. Jake braced himself. What now? I have been trying to contact my people since I arrived on Earth yesterday. I finally received a response. Jake's heart sank. They're coming to get you. Not immediately, Zara said quickly, but eventually, yes. They want to extract me and return me to our home world. And you want to go? Zara was quiet for a long moment. A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, she looked at Jake with an expression that made his heart skip. Now I am not sure what I want. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Zara settled into a new kind of relationship. With the truth finally out in the open, Zara was able to be completely herself for the first time since Jake had known her. She told him about her home planet, about her people's culture and technology, about the mission that had brought her to Earth. In return, Jake helped Zara understand human customs and emotions. He explained things like birthday parties and holiday traditions, taught her to appreciate human music and movies, and helped her navigate the complexities of human social relationships. Your species is endlessly fascinating, Zara said one evening as they watched the sunset from Jake's apartment balcony. You create art for no practical purpose other than beauty. You form deep emotional bonds with people you're not related to. You spend time caring for other species that provide you no benefit. Is that so different from your people? Jake asked. Very different, Zara said. We are more practical, efficient. We care for our own kind, but we do not form the kind of emotional attachments that humans do. At least, we did not think we could. But you can? Zara looked at him with an expression that made Jake's breath catch. With you, I can. The hardest part about their new relationship was keeping it secret from everyone else in Jake's life. His friends kept asking why he was acting so strange, why he never wanted to hang out anymore, why he seemed distracted all the time. Dude, are you seeing someone? His friend Danny asked during one of their rare phone conversations. Because you're acting like someone who's completely head over heels. Jake almost laughed at how accurate that assessment was. It's complicated. Complicated how? Is she married or something? Not married, Jake said. Just from very far away. Danny groaned. Oh man, please tell me you're not doing the long-distance thing again. Remember how that worked out last time? This is different, Jake said, and he meant it. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in late October. Jake was grading papers for the astronomy class he was teaching as a graduate assistant when Zara came and sat beside him on the couch. I received another message from my people today, she said quietly. Jake set down his papers and gave her his full attention. What did they say? They are planning to retrieve me within the next month. They have figured out how to repair the technology that stranded me here. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Oh." "Jake," Zara said, reaching for his hand. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. If I chose to stay on Earth, would you want to build a life with me? Knowing that it would mean keeping my true identity secret from everyone? Knowing that our relationship could never be completely normal?" Jake looked at Zara, at this incredible being who had somehow become the most important person in his world. The answer came to him immediately. "Yes," he said. "Absolutely yes." Zara's face lit up with joy, but then she looked worried again. "It would not be easy. I would have to give up any chance of ever seeing my home or my people again. And you would have to accept that your partner is not human." "Zara," Jake said, cupping her face in his hands, "I fell in love with you before I knew what you were. Learning the truth didn't change how I feel about you. It just made me understand you better." "You love me?" Zara whispered. "I love you," Jake confirmed. "Human, alien, whatever you are, I love you." Zara kissed him then, and Jake understood that this was what he wanted for the rest of his life. This person, this relationship, this extraordinary love that had grown between two beings from different worlds. 3 weeks later, Zara sent a message to her people telling them she had died in an accident and could not be retrieved. It was a lie that would allow her to stay on Earth permanently, but it also meant she could never go home again. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked her months later as they lay in bed together, no longer needing the pretense of separate sides or formal arrangements. "Never," Zara said, curling closer to him. "I found something on Earth that I never expected to find. I found love. I found home. I found you." Jake smiled in the darkness. His roommate situation had turned out to be nothing like what he'd expected when he'd first posted that ad online. But as he held Zara close, listening to her breathe in the quiet of their shared apartment, he knew he wouldn't change a single thing about how their story had unfolded. After all, not everyone could say they'd found their soulmate among the stars.